The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. The supergroup, composed of Damon Albarn of Blur and Gorillaz, Paul Simonon of The Clash, Simon Tong of The Verve, and legendary Afrobeat drummer Tony Allen, released their debut album in 2007 with no plans to continue making music as a group, which makes it all the more interesting when the band released a follow-up in 2018 titled Mryland. But much like its predecessor, Mryland was overlooked and underappreciated at the time of its release, and it still is today. And we're going to find out why in today's episode of Criminally Underrated Media. Welcome to Criminally Underrated Media, a series here on my channel where I discuss the movies, shows, books, and albums that are, in my opinion, criminally underrated media. Today, we'll be looking at Mryland, the second and final project from The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. Mryland comes 11 years after the band's first album, The Good, the Bad, and the Queen, which we'll call self-titled. Technically, at the time of that album's release, the group claimed that they didn't have a name, but they were commonly referred to as The Good, the Bad, and the Queen, and officially adopted the name when they reunited for their second album. But let's go back a little bit. The group really only formed to make the project that became self-titled, and now that the project was complete, the band had kind of served its purpose. They would occasionally get back together for a few one-off live performances, but other than that, the band was finished. But it's not like these four guys were just sitting around. They were booked and busy, working on individual projects as well as collaborations with each other outside of The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. Damon and Tony, along with Flea of Red Hot Chili Peppers fame, formed Rocket Juice and the Moon in 2008 and released an album in 2012. Notably, Paul and Simon both contributed to the Gorillaz album Plastic Beach, with Paul joining Gorillaz on the subsequent tour. He's also featured on Aspen Forest, a track from The Fall, but nobody cares about The Fall. Although they should! Damon was featured on the Tony Allen track Go Back, released in 2014, and Simon provided guitar for Damon's 2015 solo album Everyday Robots. But for a long time, it didn't really seem like The Good, the Bad, and the Queen had any plans to reunite, their last live performance having been in 2011. And with everyone so busy and successful with their own careers, it didn't seem like anything could bring them back together.
This means that the UK has voted to leave the European Union.
As it turns out, there had already been a second album written as far back as 2014. The group just hadn't found the time to record it. But after the events of Brexit and the country's response to it, they were inspired to begin a new album from scratch. I have no idea if any of those original songs from 2014 were ever repurposed into something else, but the idea of there being an entire The Good, the Bad, and the Queen album, written but unfinished, is really interesting and kind of upsetting. In 2017, the group shifted their focus from life in London, the concept of their first album, to the political and cultural climate of Britain as a whole, and they ended up with Mryland, an album that was conceptually similar to the first, but stylistically very different. There were two singles off this album, the title track, Mryland, and Gun to the Head. This album was overall promoted a lot more heavily than their previous one. In addition to the live performances and interviews across different magazines, every single song from this album had a music video. They also upped their social media presence and updated their official website to match the album. Unfortunately, their website now suffers from what I like to call Gorillaz.com syndrome, or maybe MonsterHigh.com syndrome, or maybe IslaNublar.JurassicWorld.com syndrome. I haven't decided yet. Point is, they took a website that used to be fun and interactive and made it way more boring. I think this is mostly because during the 11 years between their first and second album, there was a general change in the way albums were promoted. Back in the day, you would do a few interviews, maybe perform on a late-night talk show, but now, after the rise of social media, artists are much more likely to promote their music online. Mryland was released on November 16th, 2018, and much like the band's first album, there are limited guest features with the exception of Welsh choir Cora Penryn on track 6, Lady Boston. Our good friends from Demon Strings are back again as well. However, rather than being produced by Danger Mouse, who produced their first album and was kind of an unofficial fifth member of the group, Mryland was instead produced by Tony Visconti, who is probably best known for his work with David Bowie. Upon its release, Mryland was received pretty favorably by critics, but it didn't really manage to snag any noteworthy chart positions. The music video for the title track did crack 1 million views on YouTube, their only video to do so. On YouTube and on all of the platforms they use, there is zero acknowledgement of the first album, and it's a little difficult to find all that stuff as a result, but that's okay, I'll let it go. To my knowledge, none of the songs were ever used in any TV shows, like how a couple tracks from the first album were used in Skins, although I guess they easily could have been. In case you haven't noticed, it's kind of hard not to compare Mryland to the band's first album. Self-Titled was a gritty, textured mystery play about life in London, and by comparison, Mryland is smoother, more polished, and broader in scope. It's more vocal-centric with harmonies and backup vocals, whereas Self-Titled was very intentionally one voice all the way through. The most notable difference between the two is in the production and instrumentation, which makes sense. Mryland is more orchestral, with more strings and woodwinds. Damon's lyrics and vocals are much more meandering and stream of consciousness, which also makes sense because he is known to improvise.
Because I don't know what the lyrics are. Just make them up.
There is even a segment of the title track where Damon completely loses his train of thought.
Get on your mo. What did you say? Mobility.
Mryland also has an introduction, a short clip from the Canterbury Tales,
and especially from every shore's end of England.
The first album had an intro too. Technically, it wasn't on the album proper, but there was a B-side on one of the singles simply titled Intro. Instead of focusing on daily life in London, the lyrics of Mryland focus on the idea of Britain, especially post-Brexit, which I think is really interesting. It's a moody, contemplative album, a black and white snapshot of conflict in England and in Damon's own mind. His writing reads like the ruminations of someone who loves their country but feels concerned and ashamed of the direction it's heading in. And I don't know what that's like. I've always felt like Self-Titled had a warm, cozy, autumnal feel, but Mryland has sort of a rainy, gloomy, springtime feel. Self-Titled is like coffee, and Mryland is like tea. That's why I think it would make way more sense if the two albums swapped release dates. I know it's too late now, but Self-Titled should have been released in November, Mryland should have been released in January. Mryland went under the radar before, during, and after its release. It was released just a few months after Damon's other project, the Now Now, and in my opinion, Mryland is leagues better. It's not quite as good as Self-Titled, but there's a lot to love about it. I do think that it's a bit more grown up and mature than its predecessor, and I could definitely understand if you preferred this one to their previous album. I find it pretty much flawless from a musical perspective, and the accompanying visuals add so much to the feel of the album. While Self-Titled felt more Victorian or even medieval at times, this one feels more turn of the century, with a lot of black and white photography and collages used in its artwork and on its album cover. Part of the cover is taken from a 1945 horror movie, Dead of Night, about a ventriloquist possessed by his dummy, and puppets are featured heavily throughout the album artwork and music videos, and boy do I love puppets! The artwork for this album was all done by Paul Simonon, who also used this really interesting technique where he would use coffee to paint on cardboard, creating these really neat sepia tones that I honestly feel are more suited towards the first album. A lot of the album evokes imagery of a boardwalk or a carnival by the sea, or maybe like a cottage on a cliff by the sea. Either way, the sea is involved, and the music videos feature a lot of this imagery, as well as Damon in a thick layer of prosthetics, dressed up to look like a puppet. I love these videos so much, and I wish we had something like them for Self-Titled. Their live performances basically look the same as they did over a decade ago, although unfortunately they kind of dropped the costumes. And you'll remember that I said the band used social media to promote the album, and I specifically mentioned YouTube. Well, I've saved the best for last. On the Good, the Bad, and the Queen's official YouTube page, there's a series called Harold's Adventures.
Look, that's funny. This dog's taking humans out for walks.
Harold is a little puppet boy who goes on adventures and records his travels.
I love him.
His journeys will often intersect with that of the band, and they even dress him up to look like Paul. Harold was also featured in the music videos, and he is not on the album cover, but he should be. He should be on every album cover. I have no idea who the target audience was for this. I can't see kids enjoying it because they would probably be very frightened of Harold, especially if they also watch Goosebumps. Also, it's a series of like 10 videos on an obscure art rock band's YouTube channel, and I can't see adults enjoying it because Harold has a voice that is best in small doses.
Damon, please, hello. Hey.
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, hello.
Oh, hello, Harold. How are you?
It's me.
So I just love it because there was no reason for them to do this, but it's so cute and fun, and it breaks my heart to think that Harold is probably rotting in a warehouse somewhere right next to those 2D and Murdoch puppets. And I don't trust them to take care of him. They probably won't even turn on a nightlight or read him a story before bed. On a more serious note though, what really makes Mryland special is the fact that it is the group's final project. After Mryland's release, the band went on a tour of Europe in 2019, and at the final performance of this tour, Damon said this.
It's our last gig. It's our last gig, and then we're just gone.
Now, as a huge fan of The Good, the Bad, and the Queen, when I heard this, I was really upset. And then I remembered Damon says stuff like this all the time, and he literally never means it. He's done this with Blur, he's done this with Gorillaz, he says the band is over and won't make music ever again, and then they release an album like 5 years later. So I wasn't surprised when after the tour concluded, the group was completely silent with no plans to reunite. The Good, the Bad, and the Queen was over. Again. And then, on April 30th, 2020, Tony Allen passed away. The last song he ever recorded was a collaboration with Damon, the Gorillaz track How Far, which was released just days after his death. My point with this series is to show you things that I think are worth seeing and deserve more love. If you take nothing else away from my channel, listen to The Good, the Bad, and the Queen, and watch Rocket Man. But I think Tony Allen as a figure is very much worth looking into and listening to. He has a huge discography, invented entire genres, and in my opinion was one of the greatest drummers to ever live. Tony Allen was so influential in the music space and had such an illustrious career. His work with The Good, the Bad, and the Queen is a very small part in a much bigger story, but I honestly see him as the cornerstone of the band, and it cannot and should not exist without him. There is no The Good, the Bad, and the Queen without Tony Allen, and rightfully so, the band has ended.
Mr. Tony Allen.
Damon, Paul, and Simon continue working on independent projects and collaborating with each other to this day. Demon Strings continue to work with Damon on almost all his projects, including the Gorillaz album Song Machine, his second solo album, The Nearer the Fountain, More Pure the Stream Flows, and the Blur album, The Ballad of Darren. Simon also worked with Damon on The Nearer the Fountain. But in all likelihood, we will never see another album from The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. It's time for me to once again beg you to listen to The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. Go stream their music, subscribe to their YouTube channel, watch Harold's adventures, visit their website because it's kind of a weird little time capsule now. Obviously, you're not going to hear anything new from them at this point, but just go check them out, and if you don't like it, tell your friends about them anyway. I will never understand why The Good, the Bad, and the Queen's music is as overlooked as it is. Both of their albums are absolute gems. Mryland is such an interesting portrait of Britain at the time, and it's a perfect send-off for the group as a whole. It's reflective, it's introspective, it's Mryland, and it's criminally underrated. Thank you for watching this episode of Criminally Underrated Media. I hope I've convinced you to listen or re-listen to Mryland. Let me know down in the comments what you would like to see me cover in a future episode, and I will see you in the next one.